Coming to you from Kalamata, Greece on June 13th, 2024. In the past 24 hours, there appears to have been a dangerous escalation of the war on the Lebanon-Israel border. The fighting on the border had already intensified over the past several weeks after Israel violated an order of the International Court of Justice to stop its deadly offensive in Rafah in the southern Gaza Strip. The most recent trigger for a further escalation was Israel's assassination of a senior commander of the Islamic resistance forces in South Lebanon. His name was Hajj Abou Taleb, and he's reputed to be the most important resistance official to have been killed by Israel since October of last year. Now here to discuss this with me is Laith Marouf, a Lebanon-based geopolitical analyst. Laith is an expert in broadcasting law and the executive director of Free Palestine TV, and he joins me this evening from Beirut. Thank you very much for joining me, Laith.
Thank you for having me.
Laith, I understand that Taleb essentially devoted his life to Islamic armed resistance. His biography, published by the resistance, notes that he joined the ranks of the forces in 1984. I believe he was 15 years old at the time. He's said to have been among the fighters who participated in defending Muslims in Bosnia between 1992 and 1994. He participated as a leader in special operations during the Israeli occupation of South Lebanon until its liberation in 2000, and he led confrontations with Israeli forces in South Lebanon in 2006 when Israel launched a disastrous ground invasion there. What more can you tell us about this commander, and what do you know about the circumstances of his death?
Well, he also was involved in the war in Syria, part of the Hezbollah troops that went on the ground to defend the Syrian state against the Wahhabi death squads that the United States and Saudi Arabia, the Qataris, and the Turks unleashed on the country. And he is a field general, meaning this is the highest ranking officer that is on the field of any army. And he commands a division, that's in military terms, between 10 to 30,000 troops. And Hezbollah has announced that it has, to the public at least, 5 divisions that are, in the south, or at least that we know of, and they're named. Each one of them has a name. So he was in charge of the section that's between the Golan Heights and the western sector, basically, of the border. This is the most active front in this whole war. Has been this Golan and the Hula Valley, or the Panhandle of Palestine. That region has been receiving much of the attacks of the Islamic resistance. So clearly, he was a very important person. And what we know is that he was assassinated by an attack on a office or house that he was in a meeting in a village close to Saida in the coastal region of South Lebanon. So this is what we know from this, and clearly the Israelis have done this as as they have always done. Whenever they are failing on the battlefield, they target, assassinate leadership within those who are opposing them. And clearly, historically, whether we're talking about assassinations of Hezbollah leaders or other resistance leaders, every time the Zionists assassinated a leader in the Islamic resistance, a even more cunning and more radical one comes into position. People may not know that are watching us, but Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of the Hizb, has, came into power after the assassination of his predecessor, who was much more moderate, kind of at least in his dealings or his language. So now we see, since then, of course, Hezbollah has been responding to this assassination, and we can talk more about that.
Yes, and I want to ask you about that, but before I do, you know, I recall we visited the shrine to Nasrallah's predecessor on my trip last month to South Lebanon. We were accompanied by Lebanese journalist Hadi Hotait. And I recall one of you related to me a story in which an Israeli official had said or suggested that the killing of Nasrallah's predecessor, al-Musawi, turned out to be to the detriment of Israel, or words to that effect, because Nasrallah turned out to be a much more formidable opponent. And interestingly, after Taleb was assassinated, the Israeli National Security Council chairman, or he may be he's the former chairman, Yoda Eland, told the Israeli press that the Islamic resistance is not deterred by the killing of its fighters and that it knows how to rapidly fill the void. So you talked a little bit about the circumstances in which Israel continues to employ this tactic of killing senior officials, leaders of armed resistance groups. Given the historical record, which I think shows quite clearly that this is certainly not destroyed, not even weakened the resistance. I mean, I doubt that any Israeli official, if he was speaking honestly, would deny that the Islamic resistance under Nasrallah is far stronger than it was under his predecessor, al-Musawi. So why do you think they do this? Is this just a show? Is it intended to try to persuade the Israeli public and Israel's supporters that they're winning when they're in fact losing?
Yeah, partially is that they need some visible victories that they can play out to their rabid public that is calling for more and more Palestinian and Arabic blood. And that's the same that happened with the attack on al-Nusayrat, you know, the extraction of the 4 POWs and the killing of masses of people. You know, this is a bloodlust kind of game situation. But ultimately, you know, as we went through the list of all the battlefield that this valiant man participated in, you can clearly recognize that throughout these whole battles, he had apprentices under him that are now 4 or 5 generations down, 5 generations, 6 generations of different wars. And each one of them now has stepped, even hopefully when you apprentice people, they come out better than you, and have gained to it the newest knowledge above and beyond what you teach them. So we saw since that moment of his assassination, his team responding with much more sophistication, huge attacks since the morning here in Lebanon, added above and beyond the 20 somewhat attacks yesterday.
Yeah, I'd just like to, before we get into that, because I did want to sort of give people a preview of what the Israeli media has been saying about the response of the Islamic resistance to Taleb's assassination. And then I want to invite you to fill in the blanks and give us the details of this, because I've been following, you know, I follow on a daily basis the statements of the resistance groups, and I also follow on a daily basis the Israeli media to remain informed about the perspectives of both sides as to what is happening. And I've seen an absolute deluge of reports coming out of both the Israeli media and the resistance Telegram channels about attacks launched against Israel in the past 24 hours. And I'm just going to give you a little flavor of what I've been reading. The Israeli media reported that the Northern Army bases had been subjected to heavy shelling. They reported that a large fire broke out in Avivim due to the launch of anti-tank missile from Lebanon. They reported that the resistance launched 70 rockets towards Mount Meron, where Israel has key military installations. And they reported that fires are raging at the Mount Meron Air Base, apparently as a result of attacks from Lebanon. And this is just a sampling. What can you tell us, what exactly have you seen and heard about the escalation that's transpired in the last 24 hours?
Well, yeah, yesterday, by the way, we went and participated in the funeral procession of Hajj Taleb in Achit, the village that he is from. And it was the largest procession I've seen since the beginning of this war. You know, tens of thousands of people and from all the south. And you know, the Israelis were threatening, through negotiators or through third parties, threatening Hezbollah if they responded yesterday in a big way, that they would have attacked the funeral procession. But Hezbollah didn't attack the main targets that we saw yesterday. But yesterday, out of the 20 missions that Hezbollah announced, there was two that are very noteworthy, other than the ones that you mentioned. One was an attack on the Raffaelli military company factory, and it's the factory that builds all the armaments for the armor for all the machinery, you know, tanks and APCs and so on that Israel runs in its military. So, and that's blown up, completely destroyed. So this is, and another attack that was on the warehouses for all the artillery in the Golan. And so as along with the main artillery gathering points for the self-propelled artillery, you know, like howitzers. And so those two are a clear indicator that Hezbollah basically did a big hit yesterday that weakened specifically the ability of Israel to conduct ground operations in North Palestine. And since the morning, it started last night, but since the morning, we've been seeing swarms of drones, 4, 5, 6 at a time, coming out. And this is now an increase in number. We already see how the Israeli air defenses were not able to deal even with one drone at a time. Now they're having to deal with swarms of 3 to 6 drones that are targeting main bases. And the biggest zone that got hit today is the Golan Heights. Much of all the bases, there's nothing left of the bases. And the most important hit in the Golan Heights is on the main intelligence gathering hub for all of North Palestine and north in the Golan Heights. And it is where all the missions for assassinations are drawn up and all the intelligence is gathered and the orders are given from. So that is now a clear retaliation for the assassination of Hajj Taleb. And this is amongst, you know, up until now, at least 20 operations today, which by the end of the day is going to be even more than yesterday. And all of the operations were much complex. In some, you know, as you mentioned, in some attacks, upwards of 100 missiles fired on one target, while the swarms of drones were hitting those. And all the new created Israeli temporary bases, because the Israelis had basically to abandon most of the bases that have been destroyed over the last 8 months and have been building these temporary bases in forests or at the edges of towns. And Hezbollah, since the morning, has been showing the videos of surveillance, drones going over these new replacement bases that the Israelis are building, or temporary bases, and then showing the hit happen, and then showing new surveillance from drones, showing you what happened and comparing before and after. So this is like a not only complex operations in terms of the weapons combined to operate, or the number of weapons being used and deployed, but also in complexity of intelligence gathering, finding where these temporary new bases are, spotting the important positions in these new bases, where the officers sleep or where the command center is, and so on, and highlighting them, and then hitting them, and then confirming the hit with another drone to see that everything got its place. So this is a world-class operations that we're seeing being conducted since yesterday.
A few days ago, Human Rights Watch accused Israel of using white phosphorus repeatedly in South Lebanon since October of last year. Clearly, this has caused a number of forest fires in the area. And recently, at least one major wildfire erupted in northern Israel, apparently due to a bombardment from the Islamic resistance. Then today, the Quds Network published a video which appears to show Israeli soldiers launching incendiary devices using these kind of ancient catapults, the kind of thing you'd see in a movie about the Roman Empire, over the wall. I shouldn't laugh because it's horrifying to think what they're doing, but I just the sight of these catapults being used in this video was really quite surreal. But they're apparently launching incendiary devices over the wall into forested or agricultural areas of South Lebanon for the purpose of igniting forest fires. Has fire become a weapon of war in this particular conflict? And what is the current situation in terms of wildfires in South Lebanon and northern occupied Palestine?
Yeah, I mean, ecocide is always part of colonialism. Okay, and me and you being Canadian citizens, and know how the colonizers in Canada used ecocide to weaken the indigenous people's ability to be self-sufficient and or have to have healthy bodies in order to colonize them. And that's so we see Israel doing that again. But the funny part about this video is that it was actually a protest video by Israeli soldiers that have been asking the Air Force to come, to the areas facing their base and burn the hell out of them, so supposedly they can spot Hezbollah or Islamic resistance fighters easier. And the Israeli Air Force is overwhelmed. It has tons of operations to genocide more babies in Gaza. It can barely catch up with the, doing the dogfights with Islamic resistance drones, and have been refusing to come to their call anytime. So this brigade or group of soldiers built this homemade catapult and put incendiary devices in them, and threw it, start throwing it on the south as a protest. Filmed themselves and put it out in the social media like Telegram, and it made it all the way to us here. So you could see how, on the one hand, it's an indicator of overwhelming of the Israeli military force. They can't keep up. On the other, you see that actually this thirst for ecocide and genocide and burning lands and destroying subsistence of people and killing human beings is actually what's driving this creation of this ridiculous video.
Right.
Yeah.
So, switching gears, I'd like to talk to you about a remarkable op-ed that appeared a few days ago in the Jerusalem Post. And this op-ed was authored by a former Israeli Brigadier-General by the name of Yitzhak Brik. And I'm going to read to you the first two paragraphs. I believe you've read the op-ed. It's actually not particularly long. It gets right to the heart of the matter. And this is what the former Brigadier General said. Quote, one clear and certain fact, which I affirm based on the facts, is that the IDF cannot win this war against Hamas and certainly not against Hezbollah. I believe this not because we do not want to win, but simply because we cannot. Our army is small and weak with no surplus of forces. In this situation, every day the war continues, our situation worsens. Currently, the IDF and the country are heading towards internal collapse. The war cabinet leading the war in Gaza, in both the political and military ranks, refuses to acknowledge the harsh reality that it is responsible for its members, of what it is responsible for. Its members have only one daily goal: to continue the fight at all costs, as it guarantees their political positions, closed quote. Now, for obvious reasons, that's remarkable, and I'm going to invite you to comment upon that, but there's something that might not be so obvious, and that is this op-ed appeared in an English language newspaper, the Jerusalem Post. There aren't too many people in the West who speak Hebrew, and this is one of the problems that those of us who try to remain informed about what is happening in Palestine, particularly from the Israeli perspective, that we have, is that much of what is said and much of the most informative stuff that is said appears in the Hebrew language press. It's very difficult for us to get an accurate.
Or the Arabic press.
But yeah, or the Arabic press, same thing. But at least in the West, you have a lot more Arabic speakers, I suppose, than you do Hebrew language speakers. But either way, you put it in English, you're guaranteeing that this thing is going to be easily accessible to certainly North Americans and British. And a lot of people in Western Europe who speak English, or at least can read it, reasonably well. What do you make of all of this? And particularly, why do you think this stunning op-ed from an Israeli Brigadier General appeared in an English language Israeli newspaper?
Well, there's not much space to say that in Hebrew. That's for sure. I don't think anybody would have published him in, the Herodot, Ahronot, or even if you look at Haaretz, its English version is always much more, less fascist than its Hebrew version. The thing is that while individuals like this man are admitting to the fact that they are losing this war, they purposefully obfuscate or hide what is really the reason they're losing this war, and they throw it on Netanyahu and those who are governing with him. Okay, truth of the matter, if Netanyahu wasn't there, whoever Zionist is in charge would have done exactly the same that he's done, and would have been faced with the same choices. Choice number one, on October 7th, after the Palestinian resistance captured all these prisoners of war, that day, that choice is still the same choice we have today in front of the Zionists. Choice number one, accept defeat and a complete ceasefire and full exchange of prisoners of war with the Palestinians. And that would lead to what? To an internal war and acceleration of the internal collapse of the Zionist colony. Okay. The same internal collapse that this man is talking about in his editorial. He's not identifying the true nature of this internal collapse. Okay. And or the second choice, which to go to a zero-sum war with genocide of the Palestinians, complete defeat of the Palestinians and other axis of resistance, or complete defeat of the Zionist colony in military battle. Those are the only choices in front of the Zionists, no matter who they are. And as we see up to Blinken and the United States, they're still choosing choice number one. choice number two, which is to continue with this war because they cannot admit the defeat. It's not Netanyahu's problem. Israel is at its living its last days. How bloody those last days are going to be is actually the only thing that we can debate.
Which brings me to my final question, Laith, and that is this, I can only use the word preposterous spectacle of the ceasefire negotiations, the so-called negotiations over a ceasefire. And I say it's preposterous because, first of all, as I say, I follow daily the statements put out by the resistance groups, and Hamas has been absolutely consistent. Whatever you may think of the organization, its core demands in terms of what it will take for them to lay down their arms and stop attacking Israel have been the same throughout. And frankly, again, whatever you may think of the group, I don't know how any rational, objective, humane person could take issue with their core demands. You know, their core demands are get out of Gaza, which under international law is occupied Palestinian territory. It doesn't belong to Israel. Israel has no claim over it. And in fact, Israel has already stolen much of the land that was allocated to Palestinians in the unjust partition that created Israel. That the people who have been displaced have to be allowed to return to their homes, that the ceasefire has to be permanent, that Israel can't simply receive the hostages that Hamas and other Palestinian militants have, who are far fewer in number than the hostages that Israel has. We don't call them hostages, of course, you know, but they're hostages. Let's be very clear about that. And there are thousands of them. So they're saying, you release your hostages, we'll release our hostages. And finally, they want a rapid and complete reconstruction of Gaza. I don't know how anybody could take issue with any of these things, any humane person. And on the other hand, we've seen Israel say repeatedly that, as far as I can tell, their leaders have said, we will not stop until we've destroyed Hamas. And you have Israeli leaders like this Brigadier-General. And by the way, I could have also taken you to, in the interest of time, I didn't do it, a former senior Mossad official by the name of, I believe it's Time Homer, I may have that wrong, who spoke to the Hebrew language Israeli press a few days ago and said that a full-blown war with Hezbollah would be a complete and utter disaster for Israel. And there are other, you know, authoritative figures in Israeli society, military figures, intelligence figures who are saying the same thing. So the Israelis are responding to these consistent, sensible demands from the Palestinian resistance with declarations that they will not stop killing in Gaza until they've achieved the unachievable goal. And then in the middle of all this is the part that's most preposterous in my view. You have Blinken and Biden, you know, saying Israel has offered a complete ceasefire. And on the terms that Hamas wanted, it's Hamas that's obstructing this. But if you actually listen to Hamas, the Security Council resolution, which just came out, which endorsed Biden's, it's not Israel's, it's Biden's proposal, Hamas reacted very positively to that and, you know, simply tried to put some, I think, fine tuning on the broad strokes of this plan when it came back to Biden with its response. But essentially, it has endorsed the overall plan, the general tenor of Biden's plan. It's Israel, it seems to me, that's stopping this. So what do you think is going on here? I had this discussion a few days ago with Ali Aboumina of Electronic Intifada, and you know, I got his take on it. I'm curious what you think is going on here. Is this all just a big kabuki theater, and Biden and, you know, Netanyahu are conspiring to complete the genocide while pretending to be having negotiations, kind of like they've done with the two-state solution, you know, pretending for decades that they were negotiating in good faith when in fact they were building settlements and had absolutely no intention of allowing the people of Palestine to have a state. It was all just a big theater. Or is there something else going on? Do you think like there's a real conflict between the Biden administration and Israel's genocidal regime about whether or not to bring this to an end?
No, there's no actual fight between the U.S. government and Netanyahu's regime. In fact, Biden is not in power at this moment. He's a senile person who doesn't even know where he is most of the time. His vice president is not allowed to govern. And the Minister of Defense, the Secretary of Defense is in hospital. Nobody knows if he's dead or not. Nobody even knows what he has. So the person that's really running right now, the United States, is Blinken. Blinken right now is the de facto ruler of the United States, and he's in charge of course, these quote unquote negotiations. And he has declared from day one he is a Zionist. And as we see, the Americans will try, we're trying at least to create this theater that theatrics and try to have a propaganda win within their own market only. That's the only thing that they were aiming for, the United States, okay? The pressure on the streets is boiling in the United States, and they needed to look like they're doing something. But otherwise, they don't want the war to stop, the genocide to stop. Because if this genocide stops, the Zionist colony is going to collapse internally. They know this. They all know this. What's going to happen in the West Bank? If the ceasefire is called in Gaza and they continue slaughtering people in the West Bank, you see, there's no point of this if the Israelis don't, the least of it, withdraw to 1967 borders. So we're going to continue with this genocide. And Biden just a few hours ago said that there will be no ceasefire in the next few weeks at least. Okay, so that shows you that the United States is continuing. The United States is also more and more involved in the actual machinations on the ground in Gaza, as we saw with the invasion of Nusayrat. That was an American Special Forces unit using the American floating pier, using 8 trucks that came off the pier. So we're seeing the United States actually getting more and more involved in the nitty-gritty of the genocide. Okay, and at this moment, they're bombing on a daily basis Yemen on behalf of the Israelis, and they're flying B-52s carrying nuclear heads across the coastline of Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine. That was the day of the invasion of Nusayrat, just a few hours before they put the Security Council vote. Okay, so all of this, you see, what's important is to look at the actions on the field, not the propaganda that comes out of these individuals. And I would say one last thing about Netanyahu, and to show you how we're not going to see any ceasefire anytime soon. And in fact, we may go from now till the American elections, and maybe even a year after the American elections this week. Okay, but Gantz, the Minister of Defense in the Zionist colony, and Minister without portfolio, Eisenkot, who was a general, both of them were generals, but Eisenkot was the architect of the Dahiya Doctrine. He and Gantz resigned at the same time earlier this week, okay, just after the operation in Nusayrat refugee camp. So what does this tell us? That tells us that the Dahiya Doctrine of destroying whole residential areas like they did in 2006 in Dahiya, the southern suburb of Beirut, and what they have been conducting for the last 8 months in Gaza has failed, because the architect of that strategy, Eisenkot, and the implicator of this implementer, sorry, of this policy, Gantz, both of them resigned, failing to achieve anything. So what is in front of the Israelis? If they can't win, and their military cadre says our strategy of genocide of 80% of a neighborhood, destroying 85% of all standing structures in Gaza is failing. What are the options in front of the Israelis? Either 100% genocide or stop, cease right now and admit defeat. And they will not admit defeat. You see how vicious the Zionists, even in the streets of Canada, are becoming. They're becoming rabid, psychotic, dogs, attacking people, beating women. You saw there's a man it was in New York, punching 3 women. Like a Zionist financer.
I had not seen that.
In Wall Street. It's becoming they can't even stop themselves right now from almost murdering people in the street. We saw somebody stabbed in Ontario, a family. A guy crashed into their house and stabbed them because of their the stabbing was in South Africa. Imagine a Zionist white South African attacked a brown black family's home and stabbed and killed the mother in South Africa because they stand for Palestine. And a guy firebombed a home in Ontario because it has a Palestinian flag on it. So we're getting to this point of, I'm just showing you how the Zionists will not back down. They've reached the psychosis moment, and everybody should get themselves ready for what's going to come.
So I'm going to play a devil's advocate for just 1 minute. I must say that, look, I've been saying for months, and it wouldn't take you a lot of effort to confirm this if you looked at my social media commentary, that my best interpretation of the Biden administration's behavior is that it wants the genocide to happen. It absolutely wants the Palestinian people to be dealt with once and for all, and for the United States proxy, this huge military base masquerading as a country, to be in complete control of historic Palestine and then some, also the Golan Heights, possibly also South Lebanon, south of Litani River, and who knows what else. I think that is the fairest interpretation of their conduct. Everything they've actually done points to that. I'm not talking about what they say. Like you, I focus on what they do. And what they do suggests to me very much that they want the genocide to be consummated. But this other voice in my head says there is an election coming. And there was a report a few days ago which showed that Biden is at his lowest level of popularity since he became president, 37.4%. And in addition, look, they don't talk about this much in the media, but if Trump wins, I think Trump is going to be very, very focused on vengeance. And he will use his presidential powers to torment Biden and his inner circle, including Blinken. And they have exposure, particularly when you look at Hunter Biden's dealings with that Ukrainian energy company, Burisma, which has never been thoroughly investigated. If Trump really, if he wins, and at this point it seems that he's more likely to win than Biden, it's not just a question of Biden losing power. Biden could end up in jail. I think that's a significant risk. He must be cognizant of that, despite his vastly diminished intellectual capabilities. And the people who are around him, who have played, who've been with Biden throughout this entire period of Biden-esque corruption, they too must be cognizant, even Blinken, that there is risk if Trump should win. So I wonder, maybe that is causing them, maybe the reason why they finally went to the United Nations Security Council and did this is because this is their kind of moment of truth. If they don't put a stop to it at least a few months before people go to vote, they are very likely going to lose, and then they might end up losing their liberty. I mean, how do you respond to that?
I would agree with you if I didn't think that it's all theatrics, even the Democrats and the Republicans themselves. And we just lost the electricity. It's going to be back in a second. But look at the UK and how Zionists would switch between conservatives and liberals and destroy the labor when Corbyn is there, and then play it all. It's all theatrics. There is no difference, and both Trump and Biden are manufactured by the system. Their personalities and their feuds and all of that is part of the illusion. Okay. And the truth of the matter, let's think about the vote. Okay. The Arabic, the Palestinian, the Arabic, the Muslim communities, the communities that are supportive of Palestinian liberation, no matter which background they come from, they're currently orphans electorally. Their vote doesn't matter because both parties are Zionist, not beholden by Zionists. I don't like that idea that somehow the AIPAC owns all these politicians. AIPAC is part of the system, and it's just part of the recycling of the money. They're all Zionists.
I want to interject there and say I couldn't agree with you more. This whole notion that AIPAC controls the U.S. government, I just laugh.
Yes.
The U.S. government and AIPAC, there's really no distinction between them. They all have the same agenda. That's what we need to understand. So sorry.
Yes. So, okay. So given that both parties are Zionists and don't care about the vote of those who are not Zionists, and they don't need to care in reality, because there's no other option for you and me, let's say, if we were American voters. And the fact is, they have full control of the media. They have full control of the voting system. Come on, like those voting machines, you don't want to tell me they cheat them also anyways. So what if there is any competition over the more crumbs from the system, is it going to be Biden's children that can rob the system, or is it going to be Trump's children that are going to be robbing the system? Okay, that's the perks that are allowed for these puppets, sock puppets that are put in as Democrats and Republican presidential candidates. If there is any debate between them, is going to be on who is more Zionist. They will be fighting over that, the approval of the core of the system, the most supremacist parts of the system, the most elitist parts. They are in the same milieu. They're aiming for the same funders and the same backers and the same corporations that are part of this system of colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism that runs it, and they're part of that club. So I don't see Biden caring. Look at what's his name, Starmer in the UK.
Oh God.
I mean, he's getting worse and worse, more Zionist. You see that? All of them are. They don't care if you're not going to vote for them, because your vote is actually irrelevant. It's a zero point. After the point, it doesn't. It's a negative. It's not a positive.
Right. Well, as always, Laith, it's entertaining and fascinating to have these conversations with you. Very informative. I look forward to our next one. And please stay safe. By the way, I just want people to know, if you haven't figured it out, Laith losing his electricity is a regular occurrence in Lebanon, sadly, and that's been the case for many years. Every time I go there, this is a daily occurrence, happens several times a day. The fact that Lebanon has managed to hold together and is in the south putting up resistance to the genocidal regime is really quite remarkable when you understand the depth of the economic crisis that people in Lebanon have had to deal with. In any event, thank you again, Laith, for joining us. And that's our report for now from Kalamata, Greece, and Beirut, Lebanon.
Thank you for having me, man. See you soon.
See you soon.